in the post-crisis reality. So I'll be talking a lot more about Donna Troy in part 2 and why that really, really got fans' feathers ruffled. Queen Hippolyta was also an important member of the supporting cast. And early on in the run, Byrne showed that Hippolyta was feeling a fair degree of guilt. And she was also feeling a great sense of depression following the events that were part of the first story arc in the Byrne run. And so she would actually, after a few issues, leave Themyscira. She would leave Philippus in charge of Themyscira, and she would get on a boat and basically let it drift until she reached Louisiana. And she spent time working in a diner, washing dishes. She befriended the older couple who ran the diner. She took the name Polly, didn't tell them who she really was until much later. This was like a lesson and an experience in humility for Hippolyta before she finally headed back to search for her daughter. Hippolyta actually came to like being Polly, and when she revealed the truth to her friends, she said to them, "Please call me Polly. I like it." So a nice change in Hippolyta's character there. And of course, for those of you who have read the Byrne run already, you'll know that Byrne had much more in store for Hippolyta, and I'll be talking about that in part 2 of this episode. Now, I mentioned earlier that Byrne has at times been accused of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, when he takes over a book. I mean, in terms of his earlier DC work, a lot of people praised his work on Man of Steel and his general work on Superman, but at the same time, there were people who said, well, look at how much he took away from Superman as well. Well, here, with his run on Wonder Woman not being so celebrated, this argument that Byrne basically setting out to strip away so much of what came before took on even greater prominence here. And that was seen in his decision to take the well-loved characters of Vanessa and Julia Capitellis and put them way over to the side in favor of a new Greek-American mother-daughter combo that he created for his run. And I'm referring to Helena and Cassie Sandsmark. Helena was an ancient history professor in Gateway City, and her daughter was a very precocious young adolescent, Cassie. And a lot of fans had difficulty with this. They said, why couldn't you just use Julia and Vanessa? Well established, we know their characters really well. They're both really good for Diana. Why do you have to have another mother-daughter combo? And why do you have to make them Greek-American to boot? So it took some time for fans to warm up to Helena and Cassie. In terms of a connection between Julia and Vanessa and Helena and Cassie, I think Byrne was quite wise in at least explaining that Julia and Helena were friends. In fact, Julia had been Helena's professor at one time, her mentor, and it was Julia who helped get Helena her current teaching position. In terms of Cassie, well, let's address this right here, because the name Cassie Sandsmark is quite familiar to fans of DC Comics over the last 20 years. Cassie Sandsmark is the current Wonder Girl And that's why Byrne created the character of Cassie. He saw that with Donna Troy no longer being superpowered, there needed to be a new Wonder Girl. And when you think about it, I think there's something to be said for supporting characters who are completely non-powered and are not part of the superhero community. And I do appreciate the fact that Byrne didn't take Vanessa and just make her the new Wonder Girl. Given Vanessa's character, her personality, her apparent level of physical prowess, I don't think it would have worked so well having Vanessa as Wonder Girl. Whereas Cassie was someone who was certainly more physically active, a little younger too, certainly a bolder character than Vanessa was. And writers following Byrne would bring Vanessa back from time to time. So I think it's nice that we have both Cassie as Wonder Girl and Vanessa, who's still there as like a younger sister for Diana. Someone who Diana can speak with about things outside of her role as a superhero. Now, when we think of Cassie Sandsmark today, we think of a young, tall, some might say statuesque superheroine who's strong, physically fit, longer blonde hair. And this was not the look that she had when she was first created. Byrne originally depicted Cassie as being someone who had, I guess, is a tomboy expression, a tomboy haircut. It was nowhere near shoulder length, even. Also, Cassie, when she wasn't in costume, she tended to wear baggier clothes, and she wasn't short, she wasn't stocky or overweight. And Byrne didn't really talk about this through the dialogue, but I think he did a pretty good job of showing us a young female character who wasn't completely comfortable with her body image. So many female characters, younger and older in comics today, are shown wearing very tight-fitting clothes. Even in their civilian guise, certain artists like Kenneth Rocafort have been heavily criticized for drawing Cassie as having a costume that was way too tight, and which made it look like her body was spilling out of the costume, and that made a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And a reality of life today is that there are a lot of young people, a lot of young girls who are in perfectly fine shape, and their size is fine, and yet they feel very conscious about the way they look. And so what they do is they wear clothes that are one or two sizes too big on them because they want to, quote unquote, cover themselves up. They don't want to draw attention to their bodies. And so Byrne did a nice job of showing this when Cassie was out of the costume. In terms of her costume, it was an interesting mashup, I guess you could call it. She wore a black t-shirt that had the WW logo, but there was a G positioned near the bottom right of the logo. Had a kind of a spray painted look. Cassie also wore biker shorts, boots, gloves. What was really smart was she wore a shoulder length black wig, and they weren't quite goggles, but they were oversized glasses, so really covered up her natural facial features quite nicely. And of course, because it was the mid-90s, she topped off the look with a leather jacket. And this costume would stay in play for some time, although I want to say it was during the Jimenez run where Cassie switched to something that was more familiar to readers today. And I'll talk more about that as well in part 2 of this episode. In terms of other supporting cast members, Jason Blood appeared, and he became a love interest for Helena Sandsmark. There was always the question of where Helena's ex, Cassie's father, was, but Jason Blood was here in Gateway. Like in so many of his stories, he was looking just to settle down, to try not to become Etrigan, the demon. Something which made fans really angry, though, was that, and I don't know a whole lot about this, but I'll take a number of readers and fans at their word. The criticism was that Byrne really downplayed a lot of what previous writers had done with Jason Blood, and they felt that that Byrne had really taken Jason Blood and Etrigan the Demon back to the 70s and overlooked a lot of the character's development between the later 70s and the 80s. So there you go, folks. There's the main supporting cast. I should also mention, though, that as part of his mandate to make Wonder Woman a more fully integrated character in the DCU, there were certainly a lot more guest appearances by A-list characters from the DCU. During Byrne's 3 years, Superman would appear. We would see the Flash, actually multiple Flashes. We would see Wally West and Jay Garrick appear. At one point, most of the Justice League appeared. So Martian Manhunter, Batman, Green Lantern Kyle Rayner made an appearance. Certainly within the first half of his run, Byrne did make it quite clear that he was going in a different direction with this book. He had a fully formed supporting cast, and he had a number of things which he wanted to explore with the character of Wonder Woman during his 3-year tenure. So that's going to be the focus of part 2 of episode 104, looking at key storylines and what it was about those storylines that angered so many people. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I'll be talking about the negative aspects of what Byrne was doing, but I'm also going to spend an equal amount of time talking about the positives of what he did, before looking at the ultimate legacy of John Byrne's run. So again, I'll be back in 7 days with part 2 of episode number 104. Until then, let's consider this class to be in recess.